The gavel came down like a gunshot, and Jacob Lawson's hand shot into the air before his mind had caught up with what he was doing. Sold to the man in the deed for 200 acres of timber claim on the Greywood border. Silas Bramwell's voice rang out over the crowded square of Ravensbrook, oily and delighted, as if he could not believe his luck. Come now, folks, that is a fine trade for a war prize such as this one. Behind him, chained to the auction post by wrists and throat, the orc woman did not flinch. She stood tall despite the iron collar biting into the muscle of her neck, despite 3 days of forced marching that had left dried blood crusted along her temple. Her dark eyes, the color of river stone, found Jacob's across the square and held them, unblinking, fierce, and furious all at once, furious not at him. He would realize later, but at the world that had put her here. She wore what remained of her warrior's leathers, a sleeveless jerkin of dark hide laced tight across her chest, cracked and travel-stained but still fitted close to the powerful lines of her body, and leather trousers tucked into boots scuffed pale at the toes. Her arms were bare and corded with muscle, tusks small and neat at the corners of her mouth, black hair cropped close on one side and left long and braided on the other in the fashion of her clan. Even in chains, even starved and bruised, she looked like something carved rather than born, something the mountains themselves had shaped and then regretted losing. "You are certain, Mr. Lawson?" Magistrate Corwin Voss asked from his little table beside the post, quill already dipped in ink, spectacles sliding down his nose. "That claim has been in your family 3 generations. You would sign it away for an orc." "I heard the bid Bramwell already had on her," Jacob said, and his voice did not shake, though his hands, calloused from 20 years of trap lines and bowstrings, trembled faintly at his sides. "Dagrin Cole was going to work her to death in his quarry pits. I have seen what he does to the ones he buys." A ripple of muttering went through the crowd. Dagrin Cole himself, a broad man with a face like a smashed melon, spat into the dust. "She is an orc boy, Ironblood clan if her marks tell true. Half the men she has probably killed wore Ravensbrook cloth." "She was captured in a slaver's ambush, not honest battle," Jacob said. "I know the difference. I track for a living, Cole. I have read the sign on that road same as you." He turned back to the magistrate before Cole could answer. "I am certain. Draw up the deed transfer." The chained woman's eyes narrowed at him, studying his face the way she might study a strange track in snow, trying to read what manner of creature had left it. She said nothing. Her wrists shifted in the iron, testing, though everyone in the square knew the chains had been forged thick enough to hold a bull. Bramwell rubbed his hands together. 200 acres of good timber and river frontage against 1 orc prisoner, no kin claim, no clan ransom offered. "I would be a fool to refuse, and Silas Bramwell is no fool." He snapped his fingers at his clerk. "Draw the papers." The quill scratched. Jacob signed his name, the same land his father had cleared, the same cabin his mother had died in, the same creek where he had learned to set his first snare as a boy of 9. Signed it all away in the space of a few strokes of ink, while half of Ravensbrook watched and whispered that the young hunter had finally lost the little sense God gave him. When the papers were sealed, Bramwell tossed the chain key to Jacob almost as an afterthought, as if the woman herself were worth less than the parchment that had bought her. "She is yours now, Lawson. Try not to let her gut you in your sleep." Jacob caught the key, and for a long moment he simply stood there looking at the orc woman who now, by every law of Ravensbrook and the crown that claimed this frontier, belonged to him. She looked back at him with an expression he could not name, not gratitude, not yet, something harder and more searching than that. "Why?" she said. Her voice was low, roughened by thirst and disuse, but there was no fear in it at all. "Why would a man give up his whole life for a stranger with orc blood in her veins?" Jacob stepped closer, close enough that he could see the fine scars along her jaw, the proud tilt of her chin even in chains. He lifted the key toward the lock at her collar, hand steady now. "Because nobody should be sold like cattle," he said simply. "Not even to save my own skin." The lock clicked open. The iron fell away from her throat and struck the dirt with a sound like a small bell, and the crowd of Ravensbrook went utterly silent, waiting to see what the freed orc woman would do to the fool who had just beggared himself for her. She did not attack him. She did not run. She knelt. It was not submission. Jacob understood later, watching her lower herself to one knee in the dust before the whole gawking town, her spine still straight as a spear shaft, her eyes still burning. It was something older than that, something with weight and law behind it that he did not yet understand. "I am Murak Ironblood, daughter of Grosh, of the Ironblood clan of the High Greywood," she said, loud enough for every soul in the square to hear. "You have bought my chains with your own land and named no price for my flesh nor my labor. By the old debt law of my people, that makes you my life holder until the debt is paid in full, whether that be 1 season or 100. She rose again, towering half a head over him even now, and set her still shackled wrists before him as though offering them anew. "Where you go, Jacob Lawson, I go, until I have repaid what I owe you or died trying." Somewhere in the crowd a woman laughed nervously. Someone else muttered a curse and spat the word "orclover" loud enough to carry. Jacob felt his ears burn, but he did not look away from Murak's face. "I did not free you to make a servant of you," he said. "You owe me nothing, Murak Ironblood." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, more the promise of one. "You may believe that. My people do not. Debt is debt, Hunter. You will not be rid of me so easily." And that, though neither of them knew it yet, was the moment the whole shape of Jacob Lawson's life bent itself around this woman and never bent back. The walk out of Ravensbrook took the better part of an hour, and every eye in town seemed to follow them through it. The freed orc woman in her battered leathers walking a pace behind a landless hunter who owned, as of that morning, nothing but the clothes on his back, a bow, a skinning knife, and whatever gear he kept at the tannery where he sometimes bunked between trapping seasons. "Where do you sleep now, life holder, since you have signed away your roof along with your fields?" Murak asked as they passed beneath the log arch of the town gate and out onto the wagon road that wound toward the deep tree line of the Greywood. "I still have my cabin, for now," Jacob admitted. "Bramwell owns the deed, but he has not thrown me off the land yet. Might be a season before he finds a buyer fool enough to want timber claim this deep in orc country. Until then, I reckon it is still my roof, even if the paper says otherwise." Murak studied the forest ahead of them, the way the old growth swallowed the afternoon light barely 100 yards past the fence line, trunks thick as wagon wheels crowding shoulder to shoulder, moss hanging like torn banners from branches lost somewhere above in green dark. She breathed it in like a woman coming up from underwater. "It has been a long while since I smelled trees instead of iron and blood," she said quietly, and for a moment the fierce mask slipped, and Jacob saw something raw and tired underneath it. "How did they take you?" he asked, because he was a tracker and trackers were built to notice wounds and ask about them. "Slavers," Murak said, and her jaw tightened. "Not honest raiders, not clan enemies. They ambushed my scouting party 3 days from here, killed 2 of my cousins, and took me and 1 other alive to sell in your markets. My clan does not know I live. They will think me dead in the Greywood, 1 more warrior lost to the border wars." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "When I am strong again, I will find the ones responsible. Bramwell buys from whoever brings prisoners to his block," Jacob said. "I have hated that man's business for years and never had the coin nor the courage to do anything about it. Today I finally did something, even if it cost me everything I had." Murak glanced sideways at him, and this time the almost smile reached her eyes. "You gave up your whole life on a stranger's behalf, Hunter. Either you are the bravest fool in this territory or the world's greatest idiot. I have not yet decided which." "Ask me again in a season," Jacob said. "I might have decided myself by then." They walked on into the shadow of the Greywood together, and behind them, Ravensbrook watched them go with narrowed eyes and folded arms, already certain that no good could come of a hunter who kept an orc for a shadow. Jacob's cabin sat in a clearing a half-mile inside the tree line, a squat, sturdy thing of notched pine logs with a stone chimney his father had built by hand, a lean-to for drying hides, and a garden gone half wild with the season's neglect. It was not much. Murak stood in the doorway and studied it the way she studied everything, missing nothing. "This is smaller than my clan's meanest hide tent," she observed. "It has a roof and a fire and nobody trying to sell either of us," Jacob said, setting his bow against the wall. "That puts it ahead of most places I have slept." He fed her that first night from his own dwindling stores, dried venison and hard bread and the last of a jar of preserved berries his mother had put up before she died, and Murak ate like a woman who had not been given a full meal in a week, which, he suspected, was close to the truth. She did not speak much while she ate, but she watched him constantly, the way a wolf watches a stranger who has fed it once and might feed it again, or might just as easily reach for a knife. "You are not what I expected of a man who buys orcs at auction," she said finally, licking berry juice from her thumb in a gesture so unself-consciously sensual that Jacob had to look away toward the fire. "I did not buy you to own you," he said again, because it seemed important that she understand that and keep understanding it. "I bought your chains off you so nobody else could put new ones on." "There is little difference in orc law," Murak said, though not unkindly. "But I begin to think there may be a difference in you, Jacob Lawson." She tilted her head, studying the line of his shoulders, the calluses on his bow hand, the quiet, watchful way he moved even inside his own home, a hunter's stillness. "You carry yourself like a man who expects to be alone. Why is that?" The question caught him off guard, the way a good tracker's questions sometimes do, cutting straight past the brush to the deer beneath it. "My mother died when I was young. My father followed her into the ground 6 winters back," Jacob said. "I have worked this land and these woods alone since. Ravensbrook tolerates me because I bring in good hides and keep the wolves off their cattle, but tolerating a man is not the same as wanting him around a supper table." He shrugged, an old, well-worn motion. "I am used to my own company." "And now you have mine instead," Murak said, and there was something almost teasing in it, a warmth that had not been there an hour before. "A poor trade, some would say. An empty homestead for an orc with a debt she intends to collect on herself." "I do not think it is a poor trade," Jacob said, before he could stop the words, and then felt his whole face go hot at how plainly true it sounded even to his own ears. Murak went very still, watching him across the firelight, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, the silence charged with something neither of them had a name for yet. She slept that night on a pallet of furs by the hearth, and though Jacob lay awake a long while in his own narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sound of another living creature breathing in his cabin, he found he did not mind it nearly as much as he thought he would. He minded it, in fact, not at all. The trouble came, as trouble in Ravensbrook always seemed to, at the trading post. 3 days after the auction, with his stores running thin and winter still a season off, but not so far off that a man could afford to ignore it, Jacob hitched his old mule to the cart and rode into town with Murak walking beside him, refusing his offer of the cart seat with a look that suggested she found the very idea faintly ridiculous. The trading post sat at the heart of Ravensbrook Square, a long log building with barrels of salt pork and flour stacked along its porch, and its owner, a thin, sour-faced man named Ezra Prout, came out to meet them before Jacob had even set the brake. "I will trade with you, Lawson," Prout said, eyeing Murak with open distaste, "but I will not have that creature setting foot inside my store. Bad enough she walks our streets free as a citizen. I have customers to think of." A small crowd had already begun to gather, drawn by the promise of a scene the way flies are drawn to spilled blood. Jacob felt the old, familiar tightness rise in his chest, the sense of being watched and judged that had never quite left him since childhood, when the other boys had called him strange for preferring the company of the deep woods to the company of people. "She is no threat to your customers," Jacob said, keeping his voice level. "She has done nothing but earn her keep since I brought her out of that square. She is an iron blood, someone in the crowd called out. "My brother died fighting Ironblood raiders not 5 years past. I will not stand here and watch you coddle one like a pet." Murak's spine went rigid, but she did not reach for the long knife at her hip, though Jacob saw her hand twitch toward it. Instead, she stepped forward, chin lifted, meeting the crowd's hostility with a fury of her own that was somehow more controlled and more frightening for its restraint. "Your brother died in a border skirmish. He likely started chasing cattle that were never his clan's to take," she said, and her voice carried clean across the square. "I have killed no one in this territory who did not first raise a blade against my kin. If you wish to hate me for the color of my skin and the shape of my tusks, hate me, but do not pretend it is justice." "Murak," Jacob said quietly, a warning and a plea both. She glanced at him, and something in his face made her ease back half a step, though the fire in her eyes did not dim. "I will wait by the cart," she said, low, only for him. "I will not give them the fight they are hungry for, not today." She turned and walked back toward the mule with her head high, ignoring the muttered slurs that followed her, and Jacob watched her go with a fierce, sudden ache in his chest that had nothing to do with anger at the crowd, and everything to do with how alone she must feel, surrounded by people who had decided to hate her before she had ever spoken a single word to any of them. He turned back to Prout. "I will take my business to Belhaven if I must," he said. "But I would rather spend my coin here, same as I always have. She stays outside if that is your rule, but you will serve me, and you will not speak of her like that again in my hearing." Prout sniffed but waved him inside, and Jacob did his trading quickly, aware the whole while of Murak standing alone by the cart, straight-backed and untouchable, while Ravensbrook watched her the way it might watch a chained bear that had somehow slipped its collar. When he came back out with his sacks of flour and salt, he found she had not moved an inch, but her eyes, when they found his, were softer than he expected. "You did not have to defend me to your own people," she said as he loaded the cart. "It will cost you standing in this town, perhaps more than the land already has." "You are not property I am defending, Murak," Jacob said, hefting the last sack up beside her. "You are the only company I have kept in years that did not bore me half to death. That is worth defending." Something in her face shifted then, the guarded wariness cracking just slightly to let something warmer show through, and she reached out and closed her hand briefly over his forearm, her palm rough and warm and startlingly gentle. "Debt or not," she said quietly, "I begin to think I would have chosen to stay regardless." The first real test of what they were building came 2 weeks later, in the deep green hush of the graywood, when a mountain cat the size of a small pony dropped from a low branch onto the trail not 10 feet from where Jacob knelt checking a snare line. He had no time to knock an arrow. The cat's scream split the forest silence, and Jacob threw himself backward into the underbrush, feeling the wind of a raking claw pass close enough to tear his sleeve, and then Murak was simply there between him and the beast, her long knife already drawn, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for someone her size. The cat rounded on her instead, snarling, and for one terrible heartbeat Jacob thought he was about to watch her die defending him. Then she moved inside the animal's reach with a fighter's instinct honed over years of border war, caught its foreleg on her braced forearm, and drove the knife up under its ribs in one brutal, efficient motion. The cat shrieked and thrashed and went still. Silence rushed back into the clearing like water filling a hole. Jacob scrambled up, heart hammering, and found Murak breathing hard, blood the cat's, not her own. Thank every god he could name spattered across her forearms, her dark eyes bright with the aftermath of violence. "You are unhurt," she demanded, already reaching for him, hands running over his shoulders and arms with a rough, urgent thoroughness that had nothing gentle in it and everything of fear. "I am fine," Jacob managed. "Murak, that thing could have killed you." "It did not," she said simply, as if that settled the matter entirely. Her hands had not stopped moving over him, checking for wounds he did not have, and slowly her grip gentled, her thumbs tracing along his collarbone almost without her seeming to notice she was doing it. "You are truly unharmed." Because of you, Jacob said. His voice had gone rough in a way that had nothing to do with fright anymore. This close he could smell the sweat and copper tang of battle on her, could see the fine tremor still running through her powerful hands, could feel the heat of her body a bare handspan from his own. I told you, Murex said, quieter now. Where you go, I go. I did not say that lightly, Hunter. Jacob, he said. You can call me Jacob. Something flickered across her face, some decision made and settled. Jacob, she said, testing the name in her mouth like she was tasting something new. She did not step back. You are a foolish man, signing away your whole life for a stranger, walking these woods with only a bow against creatures that could tear you apart. And yet, her hand came up to rest against the side of his jaw, calloused fingers achingly gentle against his skin. And yet I find I do not wish to be anywhere else, Jacob Lawson. I am glad of it, he said, barely a whisper, because I do not think I could bear it if you were. She kissed him then, or he kissed her. After, neither of them could ever quite agree on who had closed that last small distance first. Only that the forest had gone very quiet around them, and the mountain cat lay forgotten in the leaf litter, and nothing in Jacob Lawson's 28 years of solitary living had ever felt as much like coming home as the press of Murak Ironblood's mouth against his own, fierce and hungry and impossibly tender all at once. Her hands fisted in the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, and he tasted salt and copper and something warmer underneath. And when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing as hard as if they had fought the cat together. Well, Murak said, a slow, wondering smile spreading across her face, tusks and all, more beautiful to Jacob in that moment than anything he had ever tracked through these woods. That was not repayment of any debt I am aware of. No, Jacob agreed, laughing despite himself, dizzy with it. That was just because I wanted to. Good, Murak said, and kissed him again to prove she had wanted it too. Autumn deepened into a season that felt, for the first time in years, less like survival and more like something Jacob almost dared call happiness. Murak learned the trap lines faster than he could teach them, moved through the Greywood's undergrowth with a silence that put his own woodcraft to shame, and filled the cabin's silences with stories of her clan's mountain camps, of hunts and feasts, and the harsh, honest customs of the Ironblood people. Jacob taught her the names of Ravensbrook's few kinder folk, the healer woman Myril who did not flinch from Murak's tusked smile, the old trapper Hollies who traded fairly regardless of who stood beside Jacob at his counter. They fell into a rhythm that felt, despite everything, like a life being built rather than merely endured. At night Murak's palate migrated closer to Jacob's narrow bed by degrees so gradual he could not have said exactly when she stopped sleeping by the hearth altogether. Only that one cold night in early autumn she simply climbed in beside him without asking, and he found he had no argument to offer, nor any wish to. Your people will call this scandal, Murak murmured against his shoulder one such night, her voice already thick with sleep, one powerful arm thrown across his chest like she meant to anchor him there through the night. An orc and a human sharing a bed. My people call plenty of things scandal that never hurt anybody, Jacob said, pressing a kiss to her temple, marveling still every single time that she let him. I am done caring what they think. Careful, Murak said, half laughing, half serious. That is dangerous talk for a man who still has to live among them. But the danger that finally came for them was not the small, mean cruelty of Ravensbrook's gossips. It came from deeper in the Greywood, and it came with the smell of smoke. It was Hollies the trapper who brought the first word of it, riding hard into the cabin, clearing on a lathered horse one gray morning in late autumn, his face bone white beneath his beard. Aiders, he gasped, half falling from the saddle. A war band, Jacob, a big one, moving through the high passes toward Ravensbrook. Orc riders, dozens of them, burned the Aldern farmstead to the ground not 10 miles from here. I saw the smoke myself. Murak was already on her feet, every line of her body gone sharp and alert. Whose banner did they fly? She demanded. I do not know your clan markings, woman, Holly stammered, still shaken. Black and bone-white paint, a wolf's skull on a spear. Murak's face went hard as flint. "Crux Sculbin," she said, and the name came out of her like a curse. "He broke from my clan 2 summers past when the elders would not back his raids against the border towns. He has been building a warband of exiles and outcasts ever since. If he is moving on Ravensbrook, he means to take the whole territory, not merely raid it." "Why now?" Jacob asked, already reaching for his bow, his mind racing through everything he knew of defensible ground and choke points in the Greywood. "Because word has surely reached him that an iron-blood woman was sold at your market and then freed," Murak said grimly. "Crux hates my clan above all things, Hunter. If he learns I live and that I have taken shelter among humans, he will see it as both insult and opportunity. He will use it to rally more exiles to his banner, and he will make an example of this town to do it." The weight of that settled over the cabin like a stone. Jacob thought of Ravensbrook's crooked streets, its wooden palisade in disrepair from decades of uneasy peace, its people who had jeered at Murak in the square, and yet who did not deserve to burn for it. "Then we warn them," he said. "Now, today." Ravensbrook's town hall had never held so many frightened people at once, not in all the years Jacob had lived at its edge. Magistrate Voss stood at the front of the crowded room, hands raised for quiet that came slowly and grudgingly. "Jacob Lawson claims a warband is moving on us," Voss announced, led by an orc exile called Crux Sculbin. "He asks that we begin fortifying the palisade immediately." His eyes cut sideways, toward where Murak stood at Jacob's shoulder, drawing every frightened, hostile glance in the room like a lodestone. "He also brings the very orc woman whose presence may have provoked this attack in the first place." Murak did not flinch under the weight of that accusation, though Jacob felt his own temper flare hot on her behalf. "That is not fair, and you know it, Voss," he snapped. "Crux Sculbin has been building his warband for 2 years. This was always coming." "Perhaps," said a rancher named Otis Gray from the crowd, rising to his feet, "but it is coming faster now, is it not, because of her? Perhaps if we sent her back out to meet this Crux ourselves, he might be satisfied and leave the rest of us in peace." A murmur of ugly agreement rippled through the hall, and Jacob felt his stomach drop even as fury rose hot behind it. "Nobody is handing her over to anybody," he said, loud enough to cut through the muttering. "She has done nothing but protect this town since the day I freed her, and I will remind every one of you that she killed the mountain cat that would have taken half my trap line, tracked wolves off Otis Gray's own cattle not a month back without a word of thanks, and stands here now warning you of a danger most of you would never have seen coming until it was already at your gates." Murak's hand found his, steadying, and she squeezed it once before letting go and stepping forward to address the hall herself. "I will not pretend Crux Sculbin's hatred of my clan has nothing to do with why he moves against you now," she said, her voice carrying clear and level across the room. "But know this, if you throw me to him hoping for mercy, he will take whatever offering you give him and burn your town regardless, because that is the nature of the man. Your only true chance is to fortify, to fight together, and to let me stand with you rather than against you. I know his methods, I know how he thinks. Use that or waste it out of spite. The choice is yours." The hall fell into uneasy silence. Voss looked between Murak and Jacob for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "We fortify," he said finally, "every able hand on the palisade by dawn. Lawson, since you seem to trust her judgment so completely, she will help you scout the approach and report back on Sculbin's numbers and movement. We will need every advantage we can get." It was not trust, not yet, not from most of the room. But it was a start, and in the days that followed, as the whole town threw itself into frantic preparation, Jacob watched something remarkable happen. Murak worked alongside the very people who had spat at her in the trading post square, hauling timber for the palisade repairs with strength that put 3 men combined to shame, showing the town's few remaining hunters how to read the deep woods for signs of an approaching warband, teaching young men with more courage than skill how to brace a spear against a charging horse. Slowly, grudgingly, Some of the hostility in Ravensbrook's eyes began to shift toward something more like wary respect. Not all of it, though. Not Otis Gray, who watched her every movement with open suspicion, and not the handful of men who still muttered that the whole disaster was her fault regardless of how many hours she spent breaking her back to save their homes. At night, exhausted from the day's labor, Jacob and Murak lay tangled together in the narrow cabin bed, and for the first time Jacob let himself say aloud the fear that had been building in his chest since Holly's warning. "I am afraid," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper in the dark, "that this crook will not stop until he has you, one way or another. And I do not know if I could bear that, Murak. I do not know what I would become, losing you now after everything." Murak was quiet a long moment, her fingers tracing idle patterns against his chest, over the old scar there from a wolf bite he had taken as a younger, less careful man. "You would not lose me easily," she said finally. "I have survived worse than one broken exile with delusions of conquest. But Jacob—" She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "If it ever comes to a choosing between your life and mine, know now that I will choose yours. Every time, without hesitation. You gave up everything you had to buy my freedom before you knew me at all. I will not weigh my life heavier than that debt, nor heavier than what has grown between us since." "Murak, let me finish," she said, quiet but fierce. "I have fought in a dozen border skirmishes. I have buried cousins and clankin both. I know the taste of my own death is always close in this life we lead. I am not afraid of it, but I would not survive watching Crux Sculbin take your life to spite my clan and knowing I could have prevented it and did not. Do you understand me?" Jacob reached up and cupped her face in both hands, thumb brushing over the small, neat curve of her tusk with a tenderness that made her eyes go soft and startled, as though no one had ever touched her that gently before. "I understand," he said, "and I am telling you the same is true for me. So let us not talk about choosing between us. Let us talk about surviving this together and choosing each other every single day after." She kissed him then, slow and deep and aching with everything neither of them had the words for, and outside the cabin walls the graywood held its breath, waiting for the warband that both of them knew, deep down, was already closer than anyone in Ravensbrook wanted to believe. Crux Sculbin's warband hit the outer scouting line 4 days later, at dusk, with a violence that left no room for doubt about the days ahead. Jacob and Murak had ridden out that afternoon to check the northern approach through the Graywood, the narrowest game trail winding down from the high passes, the most likely route for a mounted force to use. They found the ambush too late to avoid it entirely. A dozen riders in black and bone-white paint burst from the tree line before either of them could turn back toward town, cutting off the trail behind them with brutal efficiency. Jacob's horse went down under an arrow meant for its rider, throwing him hard into the underbrush, and by the time he had scrambled up, dazed and winded, 2 riders already had him surrounded, spears leveled. Murak had fought free of the initial press, her long knife bloodied, 3 raiders already down around her horse's hooves, but she wheeled back the instant she saw Jacob's danger, and that hesitation cost her the ground she had won. A rope net, weighted at the corners, dropped from a rider hidden in the branches above and tangled her sword arm long enough for 2 more riders to close in and drag her from the saddle. They dragged both of them, bound and stumbling, into a clearing where a broad-shouldered orc warrior sat his horse like a king, surveying a conquered field. His face painted half black and half bone white, a spear crowned with an actual wolf's skull braced against his stirrup. "Well," Crux Sculbin said, his voice a deep, satisfied rumble as he looked Murak up and down. "Ironblood's little lost lamb, alive after all and gone soft living among humans, it seems. This is even better than I hoped." "Crux," Murak spat, straining against the ropes that bound her wrists behind her. "I should have known your cowardice would lead you to ambush a scouting pair rather than face honest battle." "Careful, Ironblood," Crux said, unbothered. "I have you and your little human pet both now. I could kill him where he stands and make you watch, and there is nothing your clan's precious elders could say to stop me." Jacob felt the point of a spear pressed hard against the side of his throat, cold steel biting just enough to draw a thin line of blood, and he made himself hold perfectly still, made himself meet Crux' cold, satisfied gaze without flinching, though his heart hammered fit to burst from his chest. "You want a message sent to Ravensbrook," Jacob said, forcing his voice steady. "Kill me and you have started a war you cannot finish before winter closes these passes. Let us both go, and perhaps you buy yourself another season to gather your forces before anyone comes looking for revenge." Crux laughed, a harsh, delighted bark of sound. "The human speaks sense at a spear point. I admire that." He turned his attention back to Murak, and something colder settled into his expression. "But I think I have a better offer to make. Ironblood woman, you will come with me back to my camp. Submit yourself to my authority before what remains of your scattered clankin, and I will let this human crawl back to his little town unharmed. Refuse, and I gut him where he kneels, and then I take you anyway. The only choice you truly have here is whether he lives to see it." The clearing went utterly silent, save for the distant call of a hawk somewhere above the canopy and the soft, ragged sound of Jacob's own breathing. Murak's face had gone pale beneath its green undertone, her whole body rigid with a fury and terror so raw Jacob had never seen its equal in her before, not even facing down the mountain cat. "Murak, do not," Jacob started, but the spear point pressed harder against his throat, cutting off his words along with his breath. "Let him finish his sentence, and I will let this spear finish him," one of the raiders holding Jacob growled. Murak's eyes met Jacob's across the clearing, and in them he saw the same terrible calculation he had felt in his own chest the night he signed away his land at the auction block, the total, unhesitating willingness to give up everything rather than watch someone else pay a price that should have been theirs alone to bear. "Crux," Murak said, and her voice had gone terribly calm, terribly final. "I accept your offer. Release him unharmed, let him ride free back to Ravensbrook, and I will come with you willingly. I will not fight you. I will kneel before whatever remains of my clan and let them judge me as you demand. You have my word as an Ironblood." "Murak, no." Jacob's voice cracked on the word, raw with a desperation he had never felt in his life, not even watching his father lowered into the ground. "Do not do this, please, I am begging you. Do not trade yourself for me. It is already done, Jacob." Murak's eyes never left his, and though her voice stayed steady, he could see the tremor beneath it, the enormous cost of the calm she was forcing herself to hold. "You gave everything you had to buy my freedom once without knowing me, without owing me a single thing. Let me give this back. Let me finish paying my debt the only way that matters now. This is not a debt, damn you, this is your life. And yours is mine to save, the same as you thought mine was yours to save that day in the square." A faint, terrible smile touched her mouth, aching and proud all at once. "You taught me that, Hunter. I am only repaying the lesson." Crux barked out a laugh, clearly delighted by the spectacle. "Touching. Cut him loose. A bargain is a bargain, and I do not break my word before witnesses, even human ones." The raiders shoved Jacob roughly to the ground and cut the ropes at his wrists, and for one wild, desperate moment he thought about lunging for the nearest blade, about fighting every single one of them barehanded rather than let this happen. But Murak's eyes found his one last time, and in them was a plea more powerful than any words could have been. "Live," they said. "Live and let me do this one thing for you. Do not throw away what I am giving you." Two riders hauled Murak up onto a spare horse, binding her wrists to the pommel, and Crux wheeled his mount to lead the party back north toward the high passes. Jacob stood frozen in the clearing, blood trickling from the shallow cut at his throat, watching the woman he loved more than his own life being led away in chains for the second time since he had met her, and something in him that had been quiet and patient and careful for 28 years finally broke loose entirely. He was not going to let this be the end of it, not while he still had breath in his body and a tracker's eye for reading the deep woods. He ran, not toward Ravensbrook, though every instinct screamed for him to raise the alarm, to gather men and weapons and ride to Murak's rescue with force of arms. He knew better than that. 12 raiders had taken them by surprise once. A hastily gathered posse of frightened farmers would fare no better against Crux Warband in open country, and any rescue attempt by force would only get Murak killed the moment battle was joined. Instead, Jacob ran for the one advantage he actually possessed, the Greywood itself, the deep old forest he had walked since he was old enough to carry a bow, every game trail and deer path and hidden ravine mapped in his memory more surely than any drawn chart could show it. He knew the high passes Crux party would have to cross to reach whatever camp lay beyond them. He knew a shortcut through a narrow ravine that no horse could manage, but a man on foot, moving fast and light, could cover in half the time it would take mounted riders on the longer trail around the mountain's shoulder. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs shook, scrambling up loose scree and through tangled brush, driven by a single, blazing thought. He had signed away his land once to save her from chains, and he would sign away every remaining thing he owned, including his own life if it came to that, before he let Crux Sculbin keep her. He reached the narrow defile above the high pass just as the sun began sinking toward the western ridgeline, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds, and he found a vantage point among the rocks where he could see the trail below without being seen himself, exactly as 2 decades of hunting had trained him to do. Crux party came into view perhaps 20 minutes later, moving at an unhurried pace, confident in their victory. Murak rode near the center of the column, wrists still bound, her head high despite everything, scanning the tree line on either side of the trail with the same watchful readiness Jacob had seen in her from the very first day, even in chains at the auction block. She was not broken. She was waiting. Jacob had one advantage Crux did not know about, and it was the same advantage that had saved his life more times than he could count in these woods. He was a hunter who understood that the most dangerous shot was rarely the obvious one. He had, in the frantic scramble up the ravine, gathered what materials he could old snare wire from a cache he kept hidden near this very pass for exactly the kind of emergency trapping a hunter sometimes needed, and enough loose rock and deadfall along the trail's narrowest point to work with. It took him precious minutes he did not feel he had to spare, rigging a rough deadfall trap across the trail's choke point, the kind meant to bring down a bear rather than a man, using a tension line he could trigger from cover the moment the column passed beneath it. It would not defeat 12 armed raiders on its own, but it did not need to. It needed only to break their formation, to create one single moment of chaos in a place Jacob knew better than any of them, and Murak Ironblood was more than capable of doing the rest, if given the smallest opening. He waited, breath held, heart hammering, as the column wound its way beneath the overhang where he had rigged the trap, Murak's bound wrists visible even from this distance, her chin still lifted in that same proud, unbroken defiance. When the lead riders passed directly beneath the deadfall, Jacob cut the tension line. The crash of falling timber and loose rock was enormous in the narrow defile, and it did exactly what Jacob had hoped. Horses screamed and reared, riders scrambled for control, and for one precious, chaotic moment the tight column dissolved into confusion. Murak did not waste it. Bound wrists or not, she threw her weight sideways off her horse directly into the rider nearest her, using the fall itself as a weapon, and came up from the tumble already twisting her bound hands to grip the fallen rider's own knife hilt at an angle that let her saw through the rope in 3 brutal strokes. Murak! Jacob's voice rang down from the rocks above, and he was already scrambling down the scree slope toward the trail, bow in hand, loosing an arrow into the shoulder of a raider bringing his spear up to skewer her from behind. Crux Sculbin wheeled his horse in the chaos, roaring with fury as he realized what was happening. The human. Kill the human, take the woman regardless. But Jacob was no longer the frightened, weaponless man kneeling in the dirt with a spear at his throat. He was on his own ground now, in the deep graywood he had walked since childhood, and Murak was free of her bonds and fighting like something out of the old war stories her clan told around their fires, cutting a path toward him through raiders too disorganized by the deadfall to mount an effective defense. Jacob loosed arrow after arrow, each one placed with a hunter's patient precision even amid the chaos, dropping one raider's horse out from under him, catching another through the arm before he could bring his blade to bear on Murak's exposed back. He was not a warrior. He had never claimed to be. But he was the finest tracker and hunter in 3 days' ride of Ravensbrook, and this narrow, treacherous mountain pass was the one battlefield in the world where that skill mattered more than any sword. Murak fought her way to his side, blood-spattered and fierce and gloriously, impossibly alive, and together they retreated toward the ravine Jacob had climbed to reach this place, a path far too narrow and treacherous for mounted riders to follow at speed. Kruk himself tried to press the pursuit on foot, roaring threats and curses, but Murak turned at the ravine's mouth to meet him, and the two of them traded a brief, brutal exchange of blows that ended with Murak driving her recovered blade beneath his guard and into his side, not a killing strike, but enough to send him staggering back with a howl of pain and fury. "Tell what remains of your warband," Murak snarled, chest heaving, "that Murak Ironblood does not kneel to exiled cowards who ambush scouting pairs from hiding. Come at me in honest battle if you dare, and see how that fares for you." Kruk, bleeding and humiliated before what remained of his shattered column, had no answer for that beyond a final, impotent snarl of rage as Jacob pulled Murak back into the safety of the ravine, and the two of them fled together into the deepening dusk of the graywood, leaving Kruk's Skullbane's ambush in ruins behind them. They did not stop running until the sounds of pursuit had long since faded, until the forest around them had gone fully dark and silent save for their own ragged breathing, and then Murak simply stopped, turned, and pulled Jacob into her arms with a fierceness that nearly knocked the wind from him entirely. "You came for me," she said, her voice breaking on the words in a way Jacob had never heard from her before, not even in the worst of their danger. "You mad, impossible man, you came for me." "Did you truly think I would not?" Jacob asked, holding her just as fiercely, his face buried against her hair, breathing in the smell of blood and sweat and forest and her, all of it, alive and warm and real in his arms. "I told you, Murak. I do not know how to be a man who lets someone he loves walk away into chains without following." She went very still against him. "You love me," she said, not quite a question. "I have loved you since you knelt in that dirt square and told the whole world you would not leave my side until your debt was paid," Jacob said. "I have loved you every single day since, more than I have ever loved anything, more than I loved the land I signed away for you. I would sign away anything else you asked of me, Murak Ironblood, and count myself lucky to have had it to give." Murak pulled back just far enough to look at him, her eyes shining in the darkness, and when she spoke her voice had steadied into something fierce and certain. "Then hear me now, Jacob Lawson, and know I mean every word as surely as I meant my debt oath in that square. I do not follow you any longer because I owe you a debt. That debt was paid 100 times over the moment you ran through this forest alone to save my life, trading your own safety for mine the same as I once tried to trade mine for yours. I stay with you now because I choose to, because I love you, and I will not be parted from you again if I have any say in the matter." "You have every say in the matter," Jacob said, and kissed her there in the dark forest, both of them bruised and bloodied and gloriously, impossibly alive, and it tasted like every promise either of them would ever need to make. They made their way back to Ravensbrook by moonlight, exhausted but unbroken, and the town they returned to was already in an uproar, having heard from a fleeing Hollies that Jacob and Murak had been ambushed and taken. Their arrival at the town gates, bloodied but walking under their own power, side by side, sparked a commotion that drew half the town out into the torchlit square despite the late hour. Magistrate Voss pushed through the gathering crowd, his face pale with something that might almost have been relief. "You are alive, both of you. What happened out there?" Jacob told it plainly, without embellishment, though the crowd's murmurs grew louder and more disbelieving with every detail. The ambush, Kruk's offer, Murak's willingness to trade herself for his life, his own desperate run through the mountains to spring the trap that freed her. When he finished, the square fell into a heavy, uncertain silence, and it was Otis Gray, of all people, who finally broke it, stepping forward with his hat in his hands and an expression Jacob had never once seen on the rancher's face before. "She offered herself up," Otis said slowly, as if testing the shape of the words, "to save a human man's life. Gave herself over to a warlord who hates her clan, no less, rather than see him harmed." "That is what I said," Jacob replied, an edge of impatience in his voice, too exhausted and too raw from the day's terror to have much patience left for the town's slow reckoning with its own prejudice. Otis looked at Murak for a long moment, something shifting visibly behind his eyes. "I called for you to be handed over to that warband not 2 weeks past," he said, and there was real shame in it now. "I am not a man who finds it easy to admit when he has been a fool. But I have been a fool, it seems, about you, orc woman, and I am sorry for it." Murak studied him with the same careful, unreadable expression she had worn at the auction block, and then, slowly, something in her posture eased. "Apology accepted, rancher," she said, "though I would rather see it proven in your actions toward my people going forward than trust it merely on your word." "Fair enough," Otis said, and it was, Jacob thought, perhaps the most honest exchange the man had ever managed in his life. Kruk Skulbane's warband, battered and demoralized by the ambush and the loss of their leader's dignity, if not his life, did not press their attack on Ravensbrook that season. Scouts sent out over the following days found signs that the raiders had scattered back toward the deep mountains, their exile band fracturing under the weight of a failed raid and a wounded, humiliated leader. It would not be the last threat the border town ever faced. Jacob knew such things rarely were, in a territory this wild and contested. But it was, for now, a peace bought with blood and courage rather than surrender, and the town knew exactly whose blood and whose courage had bought it. In the days that followed, Ravensbrook's attitude toward Murak shifted in ways too gradual to call sudden, but too clear to deny. Children who had once been pulled away from her by frightened mothers began to stare at her with open, unhidden awe instead. Ezra Prout, of all people, offered to let her into his store without complaint, though Murak, with a small, satisfied smile, told him she would think about it. Magistrate Voss summoned them both to the town hall a week later, and Jacob went with a wary heart, uncertain what fresh trouble might be waiting, only to find the old magistrate seated behind his familiar table with a fresh sheet of parchment already prepared. "There is a matter of paperwork to settle," Voss said, adjusting his spectacles. "Freed war captives require a registered sponsor within Ravensbrook's charter lands, else the Crown's patrols may treat them as unclaimed enemy combatants regardless of any auction papers. It is an old law, rarely enforced kindly, but enforced nonetheless. Since you signed the original transfer, Lawson, you are her legal sponsor as recorded. I need only your mark to formalize the bond and end this matter properly." Jacob felt the old, familiar prickle of unease. "That paper does not make her property, Voss. Say it plain, so there is no confusion in this room. It makes her a free resident of this town under sponsorship, same as any indentured tradesman finishing an apprenticeship," Voss said. "No more, no less. It is a formality, but a necessary one if she wishes to remain here without fear of some overzealous patrol dragging her off to a fresh auction block in the next territory over." Jacob reached for the quill, but Murak's hand closed over his wrist before he could take it. "Wait," she said. Every eye in the room turned to her. She stepped forward instead, past Jacob, until she stood directly before Voss's table, looking down at the blank parchment with an expression Jacob could not immediately read. "I have signed nothing in my life by my own hand that was not first forced upon me by chains or circumstance," she said slowly. "My death oath in the square was spoken, not written. My freedom was bought by another man's signature, not my own choice put to paper. I find I am tired of my life being decided by ink that other hands hold the pen for." She looked up, meeting Jacob's eyes across the small room, and something fierce and tender and entirely certain shone there. "I would write something of my own choosing today, magistrate, if your law allows it." Voss blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What did you have in mind?" Murak held out her hand for the quill, and after a moment's hesitation, Voss passed it to her. "Strike your sponsorship paper," she said. "Write instead a bond of my own making, in my own words, witnessed before this town that once wished to hand me back to my enemies to save itself. Let it say that Murak Ironblood, of her own free will and sound mind, binds her life and her loyalty to Jacob Lawson not as a debt to be repaid, nor as property to be claimed, but as a life-mate chosen freely in the old way of my clan, before human law and orc custom both." Her voice had not wavered once through the whole of it, and when she finished she looked at Jacob with an intensity that stole the breath clean from his lungs. "If he will have me on those terms." Jacob crossed the small room in 3 strides and took her face in both hands, his own eyes burning with an emotion too large for words. "I signed away my whole life once without a moment's hesitation to see you free," he said, rough and thick with feeling. "I would sign away 100 more gladly to see you choose to stay." "Yes, 1,000 times yes, Murak Ironblood." Voss, looking rather more moved than a town magistrate probably ought to admit to being, cleared his throat and produced a fresh sheet of parchment. "I will need it in proper form, but I see no law against it. Write your bond, Murak Ironblood, and I will witness and seal it same as any other document in this town's charter." Word spread through Ravensbrook faster than any fire could have carried it, and by the time Murak finished dictating her bond to Voss's careful, formal hand, her own written letters unfamiliar to her, learned only in scattered fragments from clan elders, but her signature, a proud, deliberate mark of her clan's Ironblood sigil pressed beside her name, entirely her own, half the town had gathered outside the hall to see the spectacle for themselves. They stepped out into the town square together, into the golden light of a late autumn afternoon, the signed and sealed bond parchment still held in Murak's hand, and the crowd that had once watched her kneel in chains now watched her stand tall and free and radiant beside the man who had given up everything to see her that way. Otis Gray was there. Ezra Prout was there, looking almost sheepish. Even Dagrin Cole had drifted to the edge of the crowd, though he had the good sense to keep his mouth shut this time. "Some of you spat on the ground when I walked these streets a season past," Murak said, her voice carrying clear and strong across the square, the same voice that had once declared her death oath in this very place. "Some of you called for me to be handed over to my enemies to save your own skins. I do not forget those things easily, but I have chosen, of my own free will, witnessed and sealed by your own laws, to make my life here, at this man's side, in this town, in these woods. I will not be chased from it by old hatreds, and I will not hide what I feel for him to spare anyone's comfort." She turned to Jacob then, and whatever else she might have said next was lost entirely, because Jacob closed the distance between them and kissed her, right there in the town square, in front of the magistrate and the ranchers and the storekeep and every soul in Ravensbrook who had ever doubted that a landless hunter and a freed orc warrior could build something worth defending together. Murak kissed him back with a fierceness that drew a startled gasp from more than one onlooker, her arms wrapping around him, holding him close in front of the whole watching town as though daring anyone present to object. No one did. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing against each other's mouths, Jacob rested his forehead against hers, heedless of the crowd, heedless of everything except the woman in his arms who had chosen him, freely and fiercely with her own hand and her own written word. "I have no land left to my name," he murmured. "No deed, no claim, nothing but a cabin I do not even own the ground beneath. What kind of life am I offering you, Murak Ironblood?" "A shared one," she said, without a moment's hesitation. "Built by both our hands, on ground we choose together rather than ground handed down by fathers neither of us can ask any more. That is worth more to me than any deed a magistrate ever recorded, Hunter. I did not sign my name to a piece of land. I signed it to you." Behind them, the crowd that had gathered to watch a scandal instead found itself, almost against its will, breaking into scattered applause. Otis Gray's gruff voice the loudest among them, and somewhere at the back Magistrate Voss folded Murak's freshly sealed bond into the town's official records with the particular satisfaction of a man who had, for once in his long career, witnessed a law bend gladly toward something better than its own old fears. Jacob Lawson had come to that square once with nothing to offer but a signature and a desperate hope that it would be enough to save a stranger's life. He left it now with everything he had ever wanted, standing in the golden autumn light beside a woman who had looked at every reason the world gave her to walk away, and chosen instead, with her own hand and her own fierce, unshakable heart, to stay.